Entitlement often dresses itself as charm. Inside a sleek Manhattan photo studio, three white men, uninvited but protected by connections, watch Asha Monroe, a striking black model with effortless poise and runway grace. To them, she's decoration, not danger. Someone to leer at, touch, mock without consequence. They see her quiet as weakness, her beauty as permission. What they don't know is that beneath the designer fabric and measured steps lies a black belt, earned through years of focused discipline and control. When their harassment turns physical, they expect submission. What they get is precision, relentless, unapologetic, and unforgettable. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The air inside the warehouse studio buzzed with white lights, muted conversations, and the faint scent of hairspray clinging to humid air. Everything was immaculate, from the chrome rigging to the glittering gowns arranged on velvet racks. Asha Monroe sat in front of the mirror, spine straight, breath even, as a stylist dabbed a powder brush along her cheekbone with surgical precision. Around her, assistants bustled with quiet urgency, weaving through racks and cords like stagehands at a theater. Models glided by, tall and soft-spoken, their movements weightless. Asha belonged there, but she never quite relaxed. Not because of the pressure. She knew how to handle cameras and clients, how to command a runway without a word. What tightened the muscles in her neck wasn't the spotlight, but what crept in its shadows. They were here again, three of them, lurking near the catering table, pretending to belong. They weren't crew. They never were. Expensive sneakers, wide stances, idle arrogance. One leaned against a rig post, his phone barely lifted, as he snapped a candid shot of a model stretching in heels. Another laughed too loud at something no one else heard. The third locked eyes with Asha through the mirror's reflection, holding it too long. She recognized their names now: Bryce, Chase, Drew. She hadn't wanted to, hadn't asked, but they kept showing up. The first time, she'd assumed they were security, or friends of the photographer. Then she noticed they never lifted a camera, never gave direction, just watched. "You're set," the stylist said, pulling back with a satisfied smile. Stage left in 5. Asha rose. Her floor-length bronze dress caught the studio lights like fire. It clung to her frame, split high on the thigh, the back a clean line down to the curve of her spine. She stepped into her heels, thanked the stylist, and walked. As she passed the trio, Bryce made a soft whistle. Not loud, not sharp, just enough to be heard. Chase murmured something to Drew. Drew, the bold one, stepped half into her path. "You ever model for private sessions?" he asked, smirking. She didn't flinch. Her eyes met his, then flicked down to the sliver of floor he blocked. "Move." "Oh, sorry." He grinned, lifting his hands. Didn't mean to intimidate. He didn't move. She stepped around him. Her foot grazed his ankle. He chuckled behind her like he'd won something. On set, she became untouchable again. The camera adored her. Under strobes and commands, she shed the last encounter like a snake sheds its skin. Each pose was sharp, each look fire-forged. But the weight settled again the moment the director called a break. In the hallway near makeup, she found her manager, Lauren Harper, scrolling his phone and sipping an iced espresso like nothing existed beyond the glow of his screen. "They're here again," she said, voice low but firm. "Still loitering, still making comments." Lauren sighed without looking up. "Guests of Jared. Don't engage. It's a high-profile campaign. Last thing we need is distractions." She stared at him. "I'm not a distraction. They are." He finally glanced up, blinking slowly, rehearsed weariness in his tone. "Look, Asha, I hear you. But you know how this works. Jared brings in investors, partners, talent scouts. These guys are in the mix. We don't want to come off ungrateful. Ungrateful? Her voice sharpened. One of them touched me. Again? Lauren hesitated just long enough to show his choice was already made. I'll talk to Jared, quietly. But don't escalate this, okay? She nodded once, tightly. Not in agreement, in understanding. Back in makeup, Keisha, the makeup artist with box braids pulled into a high bun, gave her a knowing look. They bothering you again? Asha didn't answer, but her silence was weight enough. Keisha didn't push. Later that evening, the shoot moved to a rooftop lounge. Champagne flutes clinked, photographers laughed with stylists, and industry executives lounged like gods in a neon Olympus. Asha leaned against the railing, watching the skyline burn pink and gold. Chase approached again. No preamble, just a grin and a lean too close. You know, Jared says you're the real deal, but sometimes real talent needs a little grounding. She turned. Back off. He smiled like she'd flirted. Don't be like that. Everyone's watching. Let's not make this a thing. Then take your hand off my hip. He held it a second longer, just enough to say, you don't control this. Then he laughed and sauntered away, disappearing into the cluster of execs and hanger-ons. Asha exhaled. Her fingers twitched. Every instinct screamed to act. But this wasn't the dojo, and she knew how the world would spin the headline, Model Snaps on Party Guest. Inside, Jared raised a glass to her from across the lounge, as if congratulating her for putting up with it. Her skin crawled. That night, Asha went home alone. She peeled off her dress, changed into gym clothes, and knelt on the wooden floor of her apartment. Her GI jacket lay folded nearby. Her black belt rested on top like a promise. She closed her eyes, breathed deep, and began to stretch. Not to forget, to prepare. The next time someone touched her without permission, they wouldn't walk away, grinning. The apartment where Asha Monroe lived was small, but every inch of it felt intentional. Hardwood floors swept from the door to the wide window that overlooked the Harlem skyline, where city lights flickered like restless stars. Her bookshelf held a curated blend of old fight manuals, photography anthologies, and novels with bent spines. The one wall she kept bare was dedicated to a single framed photograph. Her first championship win at 17, wrapped in her GI, teeth bloodied, eyes alight. Next to it, pinned in the corner like an afterthought, hung a modeling comp card, all clean cheekbones and commercial poise, as if her two worlds didn't speak the same language. But they did. At least, they did for her. Asha's father, a retired MTA driver, had signed her up for Shotokan karate at age 6 after she came home crying about a boy who pulled her braid and called her Gorilla Girl. Her mother had argued that she needed books and self-esteem, not violence, but her father had seen something else. Not anger, but fire. By 15, Asha had broken her first rib in a sparring match and kept fighting through it. By 18, she'd earned her black belt. At 21, she walked into her first agency casting wearing thrifted heels and a cheap dress, and left with a contract that promised a different kind of battle altogether. Modeling didn't require strikes or throws. It demanded silence, the ability to exist in other people's visions, to shrink or swell to the size of someone else's fantasy. Her body became a product, her skin a trend. Some days, she could almost believe the illusion, until something broke it. Like when the photographer asked her to pose with a little more aggression. You know, give me urban queen energy. Or when a hairstylist wrinkled her nose at Asha's coiled curls and muttered, no heat tools strong enough for that kind of texture. Or when, during a casting, a scout called her skin tone gorgeous, almost like roasted mahogany. as if she were a piece of furniture. Keisha Duma was the only person on set who didn't flinch at Asha's eyes when they filled with heat. They'd met 3 years earlier at a NYFW side gig. Both hustling, both watching. Keisha moved through the chaos of shoots with the confidence of someone who knew every hidden current. She wore combat boots under her stylist apron, swore in French when she dropped her brushes, and always carried a folding fan she used more as punctuation than cooling. "You good?" Keisha had asked the second day of the rooftop shoot, glancing over her palette as Asha sat down for touch-up. "They're still here," Asha murmured. Keisha didn't need names. "You want me to say something?" Asha gave a slight shake of the head. "Not yet." But the tension had begun to calcify, creeping into the shape of every day. The 3 men, Bryce, Drew, and Chase, weren't just lingering anymore. They were present. After-parties were worse, loose with alcohol and unspoken rules. They'd appear at tables uninvited, laugh with executives like they were old college friends. Asha began skipping the events altogether, but it didn't stop them from turning up early to shoots, sauntering backstage like they owned the place. One time, she came out of wardrobe and found Drew seated in her makeup chair, legs spread, scrolling through his phone like it was his office. Another time, Chase stood behind a rack of gowns, silently watching her undress into a bodysuit, pretending to talk to someone on a Bluetooth earpiece. She told herself to stay focused. She told herself they were just cowards playing power games. But fear didn't always arrive like a scream. Sometimes it slipped in like a shadow behind your spine and stayed quiet. The moment that broke something open came on a Wednesday afternoon. The studio was buzzing with prep for a campaign shoot for an international fragrance brand. Stylists darted between models, and the air was thick with talk of lighting gels and lens changes. Asha had just finished wardrobe and was moving toward makeup when Bryce intercepted her in the hallway. He didn't say a word at first, just stared. Then, as she tried to sidestep him, he leaned in, too close, and said, "You got legs like you know what to do with them. Too bad you walk like you're better than everybody." It wasn't the words. It was the calculation behind them, the quiet daring in his eyes. He was waiting for a reaction, measuring how much he could get away with. Asha froze, not because she was afraid, but because fury crashed through her so fast it momentarily stole her breath. Her instincts screamed to break his grip, to drive her elbow back into his chest, to move. But the camera crew was 30 feet away, and someone was filming behind-the-scenes content, and she could already imagine the edit. Unstable model, lashes out. Diva moment ruins shoot. He grinned when she said nothing. His smile said, "That's what I thought." She walked past him without another word. After the shoot, still in full makeup, she stormed into Lauren's office. He looked up from his laptop, surprised at her expression but already formulating that practiced calm he wore like cologne. "They cornered me again," she said. This time, Bryce made a sexual comment. "Physical proximity. This is consistent harassment. I need to know what you're doing about it." Lauren leaned back, fingers steepled, the picture of false concern. "Asha, look, I don't doubt your experience, but these guys, they're friends of Jared. They're investors in the agency. We don't technically employ them, and we can't control every social interaction on a set." She blinked. "That's your answer?" "I'm saying they're guests. If we start treating Jared's associates like criminals, we'll be accused of causing drama. And that kind of noise follows models. People talk. Clients reconsider bookings. I'm trying to protect your reputation." "No," she said, voice low, shaking with restraint. "You're trying to protect your connections." His smile didn't shift, but the way he folded his laptop closed felt like a door slamming. Asha left without another word. That night, She didn't sleep. Instead, she went into her closet, unfolded her GI, and laid it across the floor. The cotton was soft but strong, stained with the sweat of years. She sat before it like a priest before an altar and began her breathing patterns. Not for peace, not for silence. The atmosphere on set had begun to shift, not with sudden force, but the slow tension of a building storm, the kind that makes the air hum before the thunder strikes. Asha felt it in the clipped tones of the production crew, in the wary glances from assistants who used to smile. Even Keisha seemed quieter, more watchful, her usual brightness dimmed by something unsaid. Asha moved through the day like a blade sheathed in silk, outwardly composed, but beneath that calm, something sharp waited, coiled and ready. It was an afternoon shoot, high profile and tightly scheduled. A luxury fashion house had rented a converted warehouse with ceiling-length windows and poured concrete floors, the kind of space that looked gritty but cost more than most people made in a month. The concept was urban mystique, whatever that meant, models draped in metallics, lights moody, smoke pumped in hazy bursts for effect. Asha was in full look, silver dress that clung like poured mercury, lips lacquered dark plum, heels high enough to make her toes numb. She'd just stepped away from the set for a touch-up when she heard the familiar laughter echo down the corridor near makeup. Drew. He was already there when she turned the corner, leaning against the counter like it belonged to him, holding a champagne flute that no one remembered handing him. His shirt was open at the collar, sunglasses tucked into his front pocket, despite being indoors. He smelled like expensive cologne layered over stale liquor, the kind of man who believed money made every choice acceptable. "Hey there, goddess," he said, voice thick with the lazy confidence of someone used to never being told no. "You got that storm in the city thing going. Makes me want to write bad poetry." Asha didn't stop. She moved past him toward the mirror, but he stepped with her, casual as a shadow. "Careful," she said. Her tone wasn't loud, but it held weight. "You're too close." He laughed, breath sour, and leaned in just enough to prove he didn't take her seriously. "Come on. Don't act like I'm scary. You know we're just vibing. You don't need to look so cold all the time." I said back off. He blinked, the smile faltering for a second. Not because he was surprised, but because he didn't expect her to say it like that. Like a warning. "You always got an attitude," he muttered, stepping back with mock offense. "No wonder Jared says you're difficult." Asha turned toward him fully. "Touch me again, and I'll make sure you regret it." "Relax," Drew scoffed, lifting both hands like he was the innocent one. "You models, man. So uptight." She turned, heels clicking on the concrete, but the moment she reached the main floor, the other two were waiting. Bryce was on his phone, pretending disinterest. Chase, standing near the wardrobe racks, didn't pretend at all. He smirked the moment she approached, clearly having heard everything. "Well, look who's got a mouth now," he said, stepping forward, voice low enough to slide under the music. "Thought you were just here to smile and pout. Didn't realize we were dealing with a warrior queen." Asha stopped. Her breath was even, her spine a column of steel beneath silk. "You three stay away from me," she said, loud enough for a nearby assistant to look up and then quickly look away. "You're not staff. You're not clients. You don't belong here." Bryce lifted his eyes from his screen. "You seriously starting this again?" "I'm ending it," Chase laughed, short and sharp. "Hostile now, huh? You sure you want that label stuck to you?" Then he leaned in slightly, just enough for the words to land soft and ugly. "You're a black model. No one's going to care." There was no response for that. Not yet. Not here, in a place where silence had been built into the walls, where everyone knew who signed the checks and who got the blame. Asha walked away, heart pounding, nails digging into her palms. Later, in the dressing area, her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Jared. "Let's keep it professional, Asha. Clients are watching. We can't afford scenes. No greeting. No context. Just a clean, sharpened blade wrapped in corporate language." She stared at it for a long moment, then locked her screen. There was a time when she might have cried. Another time when she might have tried to rationalize it, tell herself to wait for a better moment, to report it again, to hope the right person would finally listen. But that version of herself had been shed like dead skin. What lived beneath it was older, harder, and no longer interested in waiting for permission to feel safe. That evening, her apartment was silent except for the hum of the city through the windows. She didn't turn on the lights. Instead, she moved to the center of her floor, rolled out the mat she hadn't touched in weeks, and knelt. She didn't need words. Not for this. She reached for the roll of martial arts tape beside her shelf and began to wrap her wrists slowly, methodically, each motion practiced so many times it had become second nature. Left wrist, then right, tight enough for support, loose enough for movement. Her fingers flexed, her breath slowed. There was music playing, low, pulsing, rhythm heavy. She didn't remember starting it, but it filled the space with a steady beat that matched the pulse in her temple. She stood and took her stance, barefoot, weight balanced, eyes focused on nothing and everything. Shadowboxing alone in the dark, she let her muscles remember what the world wanted her to forget, that she was not delicate, not here to be watched, that her body was not only meant to be styled, painted, posed, it was a weapon, a shield, and hers. Each punch carved through air with clean precision. Each kick echoed like punctuation. The silence afterward wasn't peace. It was promise. Whatever came next, she would not step around it. She would meet it, head on. The sky above Harlem was velvet black, speckled with dim stars that flickered behind city haze. The evening was warm, the air thick with early summer, the sidewalks still humming with life. Asha moved through it all like a whisper, heels clicking against pavement, the tail of her sleek black dress swaying with the rhythm of her stride. The dinner meeting had run long, a new potential client, warm words and cautious praise, but her mind hadn't been there. Her thoughts had stayed on the message from Jared, on the eyes that never stopped watching her, on the weight of being both target and proof. She turned down her street, lined with brownstones and tall trees, just a few blocks from her apartment. Familiar, safe, until she saw the SUV. It was parked just ahead, engine running low, headlights off, windows tinted. She slowed, scanning instinctively, that flicker of unease climbing from her spine to the base of her neck. Her pace didn't change. Her posture didn't betray her. But inside, every muscle had shifted to high alert. The passenger door opened with a lazy creak. Then the back door. Then the driver's side. Bryce stepped out first, in jeans and a blazer, phone in hand like this was another casual stop. Chase followed, stretching his arms with theatrical ease, as if emerging from a nap. Drew shut the driver's door, glancing down the street, hands in his pockets, his walk light, loose, too practiced. They didn't speak right away. They didn't have to. Their presence said it all. "Late night, huh?" Bryce said as he approached, voice smooth with mock concern. "You walking around like it's sweet out here." Asha didn't stop. Her eyes flicked between them, calculating angles, terrain, distance to the nearest lit window. She kept moving, chin high, arms close to her body. "You don't want to do this," she said, calm, firm, not breaking stride. "Oh, I want to," Drew replied with a grin that showed his teeth. "You've been real mouthy lately." Chase chuckled, low and oily. "Time to remind you how this city works, sweetheart." They moved faster then, coordinated like men who'd done this before. Bryce reached her first. His hand closed around her upper arm, fingers tight, pulling her off balance. She twisted immediately, using the momentum to break contact, but he held firm. "Let go," she said sharply, her voice sharper now, steel cracking through restraint. He didn't. Drew lunged next. His hand grabbed the shoulder of her dress, yanked hard, and she heard the distinct rip of fabric. Cool air struck her skin, exposed now along her back and shoulder. Chase tried to flank her, reaching for her leg as she backed away. His fingers brushed her thigh just above the slit in the dress. That was the final trigger. Asha's eyes snapped into focus, pupils narrowing, breath slowing as her body dropped slightly, right foot sliding back into a fighting stance. One moment, she looked like a model startled in the night. The next, she shifted into something else entirely. Deliberate, rooted, ready. Bryce moved again, aiming to shove her against the wall of the nearest stoop, but Asha rotated her torso and redirected his weight with a sharp step and a firm palm against his shoulder. He stumbled forward, surprise written across his face. She didn't wait. Her right elbow snapped up and caught Chase across the cheekbone. The sound was flat and sharp, like a microphone popping. He reeled, stumbled sideways into Drew. Drew recovered fast, reaching for her again, but she spun low, swept his legs, and sent him crashing to the ground. He hit hard, grunted, then rolled. Bryce returned, charging, rage replacing confidence. He tried to grab her by the hair, but she moved under his arms, slammed her heel into his shin, then drove her knee up into his stomach. He folded, gasping. Now all three were circling her, bruised but not backing down. The ambush had shifted into a fight they hadn't planned for, a fight with someone who wasn't afraid, wasn't screaming, wasn't running. "Who are you?" Chase growled, one hand to his cheekbone. Asha didn't answer. Her breath came slow, measured. Her focus didn't waver. She moved on the balls of her feet, body loose but coiled. She remembered every kata, every drill, every bout in sweaty gyms where girls weren't supposed to win. "You're gonna regret this," Bryce spat, coming at her with a wild swing. She ducked, caught his wrist, twisted, hard, and he dropped to one knee with a yell. Before she could finish the lock, Drew grabbed her from behind, arms snaking around her waist. He tried to lift her off the ground, but she bent forward suddenly, broke his center of gravity, and launched her heel into his shin. He lost his grip. She turned, fists raised, hair falling from her pinned-up style, sweat beginning to collect at her temples. Sirens were still absent. The night had closed around them like a vacuum, each second longer than it should be. Chase pulled a key from his pocket. Not for the car, but something small, sharp. A folding blade. He stepped forward with a grin, lip bleeding slightly from her earlier strike. "You think this is a movie?" he hissed. "You think you're some warrior?" Bryce came at her with drunken fury, his shoulders squared but his footwork sloppy. Asha dropped her weight, grounded her stance, and met him head-on. Her palm struck his chest with a precision that belied the chaos of the moment, the heel of her hand catching the center of his sternum. The force halted his momentum just long enough for her to twist his wrist, bend his elbow into a lock, and pivot her body in a fluid arc. He grunted, teeth clenched against the pain as his body buckled. She drove him sideways and let gravity finish what her training had started. He collapsed hard against the pavement, gasping for breath. Drew surged forward next, fueled by adrenaline and humiliation. His movement was fast, fueled by rage rather than strategy, fists flailing without control. Asha parried his first swing, a wide haymaker meant to intimidate, and delivered a hard elbow to his temple. He staggered, but didn't drop. He was stronger than the others, and in the dark with the blood in his mouth, he seemed to forget how untrained he really was. He lunged again, and this time he grabbed her by the waist with both arms, trying to lift her off her feet. But he didn't know what she had been taught, how leverage worked, how the shift of a hip could unmake a man's balance. She dropped low, braced her foot, and swept his legs in one practiced motion. Drew hit the ground with a dull thud, and before he could rise again, she pivoted on her heel and stomped once, hard, just beside his knee. Not to break it, not yet. Just to make him understand she could. Chase, the last one standing, paused just long enough to see both of his friends groaning on the sidewalk before he charged. His face was twisted in a snarl, lips still bleeding, his hands balled into fists, like that would somehow compensate for his lack of control. Asha shifted into position, weight fluid, anticipating the angle of his approach. He came in fast, clumsy, and led with a right hook that carried all his remaining pride. She ducked under the swing, pivoted tightly, and came up behind him. In the same breath, her arm looped under his armpit, across his chest, locking him in a textbook standing choke. He thrashed, elbowed back wildly. One hit clipped her jaw. Her vision flashed white for a second, but she didn't release him. Her other hand reached around, found the folding knife in his grip, and pried it loose before he could stab backward. The blade clattered against the pavement. He elbowed her again, harder this time, catching her rib cage. Pain flared through her side, and she let go, staggering half a step back. Her breath caught, the world flickering for a moment. He turned toward her with a snarl and lunged again. She didn't hesitate. Her right foot planted, and her left leg rose in a clean, snapping roundhouse. Her shin struck his cheek with a brutal crack. He twisted midair, legs buckling beneath him, and hit the ground. His hands scrambled at the concrete, trying to push himself back up. Asha didn't give him the chance. She straddled his back, gripped his arm, and pulled it behind him into a tight control lock. Her other knee pinned his shoulder down. His muscles resisted, but she adjusted the angle, and his body froze in pain. "You're done," she said, voice low, each word shaped with breath and rage. Chase spat curses into the pavement, but he didn't move. Bryce was still writhing against the sidewalk a few feet away, clutching his ribs and trying to breathe through the growing panic in his eyes. Drew had rolled to his knees, blood dripping from his lip, his chest heaving, eyes darting around the street like he might run, though even he knew it was too late for that. From somewhere above, a woman screamed. A window slammed open. Another shouted, "I'm calling the cops!" Lights flicked on in sequence, glowing rectangles in the rows of brownstones that lined the street. Curtains shifted. Cell phone cameras emerged. Someone turned on their porch light. Asha's arms didn't waver. She held Chase down, the bones of his wrist grinding against the lock. Her breath steady, sweat trailing down her temple. Her dress hung in torn folds across her back, one strap hanging loose, blood drying near her collar. The quiet hum of violence still clung to the air, thick as smoke. Drew finally shouted, voice hoarse, "She attacked us! Somebody help!" "She's crazy," Bryce added, louder but more breathless. "We didn't do anything." But no one was stepping in. Across the street, a man in his 30s filmed with one hand and held his phone to his ear with the other. "Yeah, 3 of them. Big guys. She fought them off. They tried to grab her. Yeah. No, she's the one who got jumped." Another voice, higher, female, called from a second-story window. "We saw it all." "She didn't start it." Chase squirmed beneath her, trying one last time to twist out of her hold. Asha leaned in slightly, forcing his shoulder into the pavement. "Keep moving, and I'll dislocate it," she whispered. "I don't care how loud you scream." He froze, not in compliance, but in fear. From down the street, the first faint wail of sirens floated into the air, still distant, but approaching fast. Asha didn't lift her eyes. She stayed crouched over the man beneath her, locking his wrist in place with unwavering control, holding the scene in balance. The fight wasn't about strength. It never had been. It was about refusing to be erased. The sirens grew louder, sharpening from a distant warning to a full-force arrival as two cruisers turned onto the block with strobing urgency. Red and blue light spilled across the brownstones, coloring the faces of neighbors who stood on porches, leaning over balconies, filming, watching. The SUV that had brought the violence now looked exposed under flashing lights, its doors still open, its engine idling like a guilty accomplice. Asha remained crouched over Chase, her grip firm on his wrist, his shoulder still locked beneath her weight. The moment the first officer stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a neutral expression, she slowly released the hold and stood, lifting her hands to show she posed no threat. Her body ached, each joint registering impact, but her stance was composed, eyes forward, blood drying along her brow, bruises blooming under the studio makeup that had barely clung through the brawl. Behind her, Chase groaned and rolled onto his side, cradling his arm. Bryce sat hunched against the curb, hands on his knees, chest heaving, his confidence drained. Drew had taken refuge by the SUV, leaning on the passenger side door, his shirt stained and wrinkled, face marked with swelling that would bloom worse by morning. "They attacked me," Chase called out first, voice laced with feigned pain and righteous indignation. "She went crazy. She started screaming and hitting us. We didn't do anything," Bryce added, louder now as another officer approached. "We were trying to calm her down. She just snapped out of nowhere." Drew nodded along, clutching his side like a stage prop. "We were just talking to her. Then she jumped us. All three of us. Look at us." The officers didn't move immediately. They looked to Asha. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't plead. "She was walking home," came a voice from the second-floor window of the nearest brownstone. A woman leaned out, one hand gripping her phone, the other still recording. "I saw the whole thing. They jumped out that car and went straight for her. One of them grabbed her arm. Another tried to pull her dress. She warned them," said a deeper voice from across the street. A middle-aged man in a hoodie stepped into the light, nodding toward the officers. "She told them to back off. They didn't. You want proof? I've got it." He held up his phone, the screen still lit, thumb hovering over the playback icon. A younger man, no older than 20, crossed the street slowly, phone raised like a trophy. "I caught them before it even started," he said. "They were sitting in the car with the lights off, watching her walk. One of them pointed and said, 'Now watch this.' Got it all recorded." The first officer, a black woman with her badge clipped to the front of her vest, took the boy's phone and studied the video. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she listened. Asha watched her watch it. The officer said nothing, but her shoulders squared as the truth settled in. The second officer approached Bryce and motioned for him to stand. "Hands where I can see them." "What? Are you serious?" Bryce stood unsteadily. "We're the victims here." "She has a weapon," Chase shouted, pointing toward the knife on the pavement. The officer glanced at it. "One of you brought that knife," he said, calm but absolute. "And the video shows it." One by one, the men were cuffed. None of them went quietly. Chase protested the loudest, his voice rising with every click of steel behind his back. "Do you even know who I am? I have friends in the department. This is insane. She lured us. This is entrapment." Bryce spat on the ground and said nothing else. Drew looked away from Asha as he was escorted to the cruiser, jaw clenched and bleeding, the last trace of smugness gone from his face. A paramedic approached Asha gently, asking if she was injured. She nodded slightly, her voice calm despite the sting in her ribs and the ache in her neck. Left temple, cut. Some bruising. I'll be fine. Another officer took her statement, clipboard in hand, listening carefully, never interrupting. She answered every question clearly. What happened? What was said? When she had first seen them? How long they had been harassing her? She gave names, details, facts, not anger, not tears. There would be time for those later. For now, clarity was power. The neighbors lingered, murmuring in small groups. One of them handed her a bottle of water. Another offered to walk her home. She declined kindly, assuring them she was okay, even though her body trembled slightly from the crash of adrenaline beginning to drain. By the time she stepped away from the flashing lights, her phone buzzed in her purse. Loren. She almost didn't answer, but something told her to hear what he had to say. Asha, came his voice, breathless and tense. I just saw a post. Something about a fight? Please, please don't post anything yet. We're trying to contain this. I haven't posted anything, she said, voice flat. Good, good, Lauren said quickly, then softened his tone as if rehearsing empathy. Look, just don't make this into a bigger deal. The agency's on your side, but we have to be strategic. Jared's already asking questions. Clients might get nervous. Just stay off socials. Let us handle it. Her grip on the phone tightened slightly. She stared out at the street where 3 men had tried to drag her into a car, where she'd bled onto the sidewalk defending herself, where strangers had believed her faster than the people paid to protect her. Thanks for your concern, she said finally. Then she hung up. She didn't look at the screen again. She didn't need his permission. Asha walked the rest of the way home under the still flashing lights, her heels in one hand, her torn dress clinging to her skin. Her reflection flickered briefly in a passing car window, not as a victim, not as a broken woman, but as something steadier, quieter, and far more dangerous than they'd expected. Her body ached. Her face stung, but her voice had never been clearer, and the silence was done answering to anyone. The morning after the attack, the sky was pale and cloudless, the city bleached in early sun like nothing had ever happened. But inside Asha Monroe's apartment, the energy was electric, quiet, focused, and razor-sharp. Her body moved slowly from room to room, sore from the fight. Each bruise a reminder not just of violence, but of survival. She wore a simple black hoodie and sweatpants, hair pulled back, makeup stripped away, face bare and bruised beneath the morning light. She sat at her kitchen counter with her laptop open, her phone beside it, both screens glowing. The notifications had already begun. Reporters, friends, strangers, all speculating after one of the neighbors posted a blurry video of flashing lights, shouting, and the faint silhouette of her holding a man down in the street. The caption simply read, "She warned them." But speculation wasn't enough. Truth had to be deliberate. Asha opened her notes app, her fingers still stiff from impact, and began to write. Not a rant, not a breakdown. A statement. Calm, detailed, irrefutable. She included everything she knew would be questioned, where she was coming from, what she was wearing, the fact that they were not strangers, not random attackers in the dark, but men who had stalked her for weeks with the open support of those in power. She named the pattern, the comments on her body, the hands on her back, the dismissals when she spoke up, and finally, the night they decided she no longer had the right to say no. She never asked for pity. She never demanded sympathy. She just told the truth. When she was done, she read it 3 times, each pass sharpening the language, cutting out any softness that might be used to undermine her. Then she attached a photo of her bruised face, not glamorized, not styled, just raw and honest, and hit post. The caption was short, simple. "No one protected me, so I protected myself. Chug strike back." Within minutes, the post began to travel. Within an hour, it was everywhere. But she didn't stop there. She opened her saved files, screenshots she had quietly collected in the weeks leading up to this, waiting for the moment when silence would no longer serve her. She uploaded the email she'd sent Lauren on May 5th, detailing the behavior of Bryce, Chase, and Drew during a campaign fitting. She posted her follow-up, dated May 11th, with no response. Then she shared the text from Jared Locke himself, sent late one evening after she declined to attend an after-party. The message read, "You're too sensitive, Asha. Some of these guys are investors. They're not trying to hurt you. You just need to be humbled a little. Let loose." The words didn't need commentary. They sang their own truth. Screenshots followed. A message thread with another model warning her about the same men. A group chat with stylists whispering about how those guys make everyone uncomfortable. But no one wanted to lose work by speaking up. And when she posted a second tweet, "This is what silence gets us." Strike back. The internet caught fire. By the afternoon, the hashtag trended globally. Strike back. The wave moved fast and without hesitation. Other models began sharing their own stories, some with names, some anonymously, some from the very same agency, others from agencies across the country. Black models spoke of being labeled difficult when they refused to be touched without consent, or being told they were too aggressive when they asked not to be groped during costume changes. Makeup artists posted cryptic messages about things they'd seen and stayed quiet about. Stylists confirmed her timeline. Assistants shared photos of the men lurking backstage, and one brave woman, a junior booking agent, posted that she'd been warned by Jared to never take Asha's complaints seriously. She plays the race card too easily. Keisha Duma posted a video to her stories just after lunch. She sat at her makeup station, framed by ring lights, face solemn. "I watched what happened to Asha. I've watched it happen before. I didn't say enough then. I'm saying something now. No one protected her. And there are more of us. We're done being quiet." Other creatives followed. Photographers, casting directors, even a handful of clients. Some removed their names from upcoming shoots. Others posted statements of support, vowing never to work with Apex Models Agency again unless real changes were made. Jared Locke remained silent. He didn't post. He didn't issue a statement. And when reporters reached out to his office, they were told he was not available for comment. Instead, the agency posted a bland image. White text on a gray background, centered, sterile. "We are aware of recent allegations concerning certain individuals associated with our extended professional network. An internal investigation is underway. We stand for safety, inclusivity, and professionalism. No names, no apology, no ownership." The comments section turned against them within seconds. "This is not an allegation. It's a crime." Internal investigation? She reported it weeks ago. Protect black women. Period. Silence is complicity. The agency's post was flooded with replies, retweets, and screenshots of Asha's evidence. Their attempt to control the narrative only inflamed it further. Major news outlets picked up the story by evening. Morning shows began requesting interviews, but Asha wasn't in a rush to speak further. She had said what needed to be said. Now, she watched. She watched the world respond to a story that, not long ago, would have disappeared beneath a makeup touch-up and a nervous apology. She watched the people who had dismissed her scramble to rewrite their roles, And she watched women, especially black women, stand taller in their own truths because she had refused to stay small in hers. By the end of the day, the hashtag had crossed 1 million uses. She turned off her phone, the screen still buzzing with energy, and stood quietly by her window, looking out at the city that had taught her how to survive by silence, and which now had no choice but to listen. The tremors of Asha's statement had turned into a full-blown earthquake by the end of the week. Not just a media frenzy, not just viral outrage, but something deeper. A shift in the unspoken architecture of an industry that had too long confused proximity to power with protection from consequence. It began with a single page. A digital document titled "We Will Not Be Silent" began circulating quietly among working models. The header was unassuming. The names beneath it were not. Dozens of black models, some newcomers, some veterans, whose faces graced the most exclusive runways, signed it in rapid succession. Each signature carried the weight of stories long buried under professionalism and fear. Late-night castings with doors that didn't lock, photographers who forgot their assistants, hands that brushed too low under the guise of correction, stylists who whispered warnings only after the shoot had ended. The letter was direct but unflinching. It named the culture, not just the men. It pointed to the executives who cultivated silence, the managers who brushed off reports, and the clients who kept hiring agencies with blood under their contracts. It was a statement of truth, of exhaustion, and most importantly, of unity. Asha didn't need to write it. Her name was at the top anyway. By the time it hit the inboxes of every major fashion magazine and advertising house, there was no turning away. Reporters began to chase the story in earnest. Morning talk shows discussed it with wide-eyed anchors quoting phrases like institutionalized predation and racialized complicity in modeling, as if those weren't the same dynamics they'd ignored during previous scandals. But Asha wasn't chasing cameras. She wasn't accepting invitations to go on panel discussions or sit for interviews that reduced her life to a headline. She had work to do. With her attorney, a steely black woman named Jacqueline Pierce, Asha filed a civil lawsuit against Apex Models Agency for willful negligence, enabling a hostile work environment and failing to act on repeated reports of harassment. The legal documents included timestamps, messages, witness statements, and even the video clips gathered the night of the attack. The case named Jared Locke personally, as well as the agency's holding company. It didn't seek attention. It demanded accountability. The filing made headlines within minutes of hitting the courthouse docket. Apex responded with carefully worded denial, but their tone carried the faint whiff of desperation. Their press release insisted they were committed to safety and working closely with all parties, but no amount of careful language could hide what was coming. Leaked emails began to circulate among journalists. One in particular, dated months before Asha's attack, showed Jared writing to another executive. "She's got talent, but she's volatile. Either she learns her place or someone will teach her. Keep her on a short leash." No denial could explain that away. By the end of the second week, Jared Locke was fired from the agency with a 2-line memo that avoided using his name at all. His office was emptied overnight, his name scrubbed from the website, his bio quietly erased. But the internet never forgets, and neither did the women whose lives he helped endanger. Of the 3 men who had attacked her, 2 had fled the city after their release on bail. One of them, Drew, the one caught on video wielding the blade, was charged with felony attempted assault. The district attorney's office made the announcement publicly, citing overwhelming digital evidence and multiple eyewitnesses. His court date was set. His future, once shielded by wealth and arrogance, now hinged on footage recorded by a teenager with a cracked phone screen. Asha never celebrated these developments. There were no triumphant tweets, no victory dances, no camera crews waited outside her building to catch a soundbite. Instead, she moved through her days with the same focused stillness that had carried her through the fight. She gave no interviews. She made no threats. She let the legal system do what it had to do, and she stayed disciplined. She trained each morning in her living room just enough to feel her body again, to center herself. No audience, no performance, just breath, repetition, silence. In the afternoons, she met with Jacqueline, who prepared her for depositions, walked her through legal language, and spoke with the precision of someone who knew every move her opponents would make before they made it. The agency's legal team attempted to push for mediation. They offered a sealed settlement, then another, then a third, higher still. Asha reviewed them all without flinching. She had always known her value. Now they knew it too. At night, she meditated, not to escape the weight of it all, but to sit with it. The bruises had begun to fade. Her skin, once marked by strikes, now glowed in the dim light of her apartment as she held her stillness like a ritual. She let the fear pass through her. Let the rage settle into something sharper. She didn't try to forget the men's faces, their voices, the moments of impact. She studied them, remembered them, not out of hate, but because clarity had become her greatest weapon. People tried to draw her into the spotlight. Major outlets offered exclusive interviews. A streaming platform proposed a documentary. A talk show host sent a handwritten note asking for her voice in this historic moment. Asha declined them all. She was not here to be the centerpiece of another cycle of content. She was building something quieter, something lasting. In the silence, while the industry shouted and scrambled and shifted, she made plans. The courthouse was a different kind of runway, cold, angular, unforgiving. There were no cameras clicking for fashion, no applause for presence, only rows of hard benches and eyes that watched not out of admiration, but out of calculation. Asha walked through the corridors with the same poise she had once reserved for the catwalk, dressed not to impress, but to anchor. A tailored charcoal suit, soft matte lipstick, hair pulled back into a single braid. Controlled, measured, ready. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was sterile and tense, the kind of quiet that throbbed with anticipation. Legal teams sat on either side like opposing forces in a high-stakes game of precision and posture. But no one in the room could pretend it was just another corporate dispute. Not after the flood of media attention, the screenshots, the video, and the now infamous hashtag that had rewritten the rules. Jacqueline Pierce, Asha's attorney, stood at the front like she'd been born in courtrooms, her voice calm and sharp as she presented the first round of depositions. She never raised her voice. She never had to. Her power came from stillness. Her pauses landed like punches, and her words never needed repetition. "We will demonstrate," she began, looking first at the judge, then at the jury, that Apex Models Agency, under the leadership of Jared Locke, not only failed to protect their models from repeated harassment, but knowingly enabled a pattern of abuse. What you are about to hear is not hearsay. It is documented, it is deliberate, and it is disgracefully common. What followed wasn't drama. It was exposure. A former intern was the first to testify. Nervous at first, she sat with her hands clasped tight in her lap, but found strength in the telling. "I was there during castings," she said. "I saw the guys, Bryce, Chase, and Drew, come into the building even though they weren't on payroll. Jared called them his after-hours VIPs. They sat in on meetings, fittings, and no one told them to leave. One time, I heard him tell them, 'The girls are like horses before a race, nervous and easy to steer.'" Gasps rippled faintly across the room. Jacqueline didn't flinch. She nodded once and moved on. The second witness, A former junior agent who had worked under Jared directly was less nervous and far more damning. "I was instructed not to pass along any complaints unless they came from white models," she said without hesitation. "Jared said it straight to me. He said, 'The black girls complain too much. Every little thing becomes a civil rights issue.' He told me not to book Asha unless absolutely necessary. He said she was trying to burn the house down from inside." A hush settled over the courtroom. The agency's lawyers objected, called it hearsay, but Jacqueline countered with a printed email that confirmed the exact phrasing. The judge allowed it. The agency's objections were wearing thin. Then came the former stylist, one who had worked on several high-end shoots and often interacted directly with the models. She had nothing to gain. She was still working in the industry. And still, she sat down and spoke, like the truth weighed too heavily to hold any longer. "I told Jared once that the guys made us all uncomfortable," she said. "He laughed and said, 'They're bored trust fund babies. Let them feel important.' I told him Chase cornered Asha in the hallway. Jared replied, 'She's tough. She'll handle herself. Don't baby her.'" Jacqueline waited, then asked gently, "Did he ever address it? Ever take action?" The stylist shook her head. "No. He said Asha needed to learn humility." Another printed message was presented. It read, in Jared's own words, "A little pressure keeps them sharp. Don't reward drama. If she wants to throw punches, she'll get hit back." The judge raised an eyebrow at that. The jury, by now, leaned forward every time Jacqueline stood. When it came time for Asha to speak, the courtroom turned breathless. She walked to the stand with no performance in her steps, no dramatics in her posture. She spoke clearly, her voice still carrying the softness of someone who had learned long ago how to control the emotional tremble just beneath the surface. Her tone never spiked. It never wavered. It simply held. "I reported the harassment more than once," she said. "First to my manager, then to the agency directly. I was told to be careful, to keep quiet, to think about my image. I was told they were guests, and that it would all go away if I smiled through it." She paused only to breathe, not to cry. "They tried to make me feel like I was overreacting, that my safety was a threat to the agency's reputation, that their comfort mattered more than my autonomy. And when I defended myself, when I refused to be hurt quietly, I was called volatile, difficult, aggressive, because I was black. Because I didn't beg." The room remained silent, and in that silence, the weight of her words stretched farther than any evidence on paper. The cross-examination was brief. The defense attorneys attempted to frame her as combative, tried to pick at her control, but it only reinforced the very narrative Jacqueline had spent the case building. "You seem calm," one attorney noted, "almost like a challenge. Is that how you typically respond under pressure?" Asha looked at him, unblinking. "Calm doesn't mean passive. It means I've already fought the battle you're trying to start." By the close of the session, the court had not only heard how deeply Jared had protected the men, but how thoroughly the agency had designed itself to insulate those who wielded power. The culture exposed wasn't just careless. It was constructed, systemic, and indiscriminate in its silence. Outside the courthouse, journalists crowded the steps. Microphones pointed like weapons, cameras flashing. But Asha didn't stop. She walked past them with Jacqueline at her side, ignoring every shouted question, every request for comment. She had already said everything that mattered. Under oath, in front of the world, in her own voice. She didn't need to shout over the noise. She had let the truth speak for itself. The courtroom was subdued, as if the walls themselves understood the weight of what had transpired within them. The air no longer buzzed with the same tension it had at the start of the trial. There were no more fiery cross-examinations, no anxious witnesses shifting on the stand. No attorneys exchanging cold glances like blades drawn behind smiles. Instead, everything moved with the weary finality of something nearing its end. Asha Monroe sat with her back straight, hands resting gently in her lap, her posture serene, but her gaze unwavering. She wore no expression of triumph, no visible emotion to color the close of the long public battle. There had been too much pain for celebration, and too much strategy for indulgence. This was not a victory lap. It was the conclusion of a necessary reckoning. Across from her, the defense attorneys sat rigidly behind a cluster of closed folders, whispering to one another in clipped tones. The chairs once occupied by Jared Locke and the three men who had attacked her were now empty. No show of contrition, no final words. Jared had not been present for the last 3 days of proceedings, a calculated disappearance managed by his new legal team in what they likely imagined was damage control. The men were under separate investigation now, facing criminal charges, with their own fate winding down a different corridor of justice. Only Jacqueline Pierce remained composed at Asha's side, her charcoal suit impeccable, her notepad closed, her pen resting untouched. The battle was over, and Jacqueline, always professional, allowed herself the smallest exhale of quiet satisfaction. Not pride, not smugness, just a brief, measured release. The judge, a seasoned man with thinning silver hair and deep-set eyes, cleared his throat. His voice was calm and final when he spoke. After a thorough mediation process and under the guidance of both legal teams, the court has been informed that a settlement has been reached. The terms of this settlement will remain sealed, as requested by all parties involved. He paused, gaze drifting briefly toward Asha, though he said nothing more. This case is now concluded. He raised his gavel and brought it down with a soft knock. There was no drama in the gesture, only formality. Still, the sound echoed gently through the room, signaling that the fight, at least in this setting, was over. Asha blinked once, slowly. She didn't relax. Her body remained still, alert, but there was a subtle release of breath through her nose, a signal that something within her had finally settled. Jacqueline leaned toward her, her voice quiet but edged with dry satisfaction. "It's done." Asha turned her head slightly, not to respond right away, but to meet her attorney's eyes directly. "Thank you," she said softly, "for believing me when they didn't." Jacqueline offered a nod in return, the unspoken respect between them requiring no more words. As they stood, aides began collecting documents, the court clerk rising from her seat with practiced efficiency. A few spectators in the gallery, some journalists, some members of the legal community, a few quiet supporters, began to gather their things, speaking in hushed tones that buzzed faintly like static behind glass. But Asha didn't move quickly. She adjusted her suit jacket, white and sculpted with clean lines, the fabric firm but flowing, a perfect armor of composure. Her heels echoed with precision on the marble floor as she walked the length of the courtroom. Behind her, whispers were already surfacing. They say the payout was in the high 6 figures. Sealed settlement. But everyone's guessing. Must have been a fortune. Worth every penny to keep her quiet. Though she won't be. Asha heard it, but didn't absorb it. Let them speculate. Let them chase numbers. Define value by zeros and commas. They could talk about money. She would keep talking about power. As she reached the rear exit, the court officer gestured discreetly toward a side door. "Miss Monroe, we can arrange an exit out the back if you'd like to avoid the press." She paused. For a moment, Jacqueline waited for her to decide. But Asha shook her head. "No," she said, her voice firm but even. "I'll take the front." The officer hesitated, then nodded. "As you wish." Together, Asha and Jacqueline stepped out into the corridor. The hallway outside the courtroom was colder. a sharp contrast to the energy left inside. Fluorescent lights cast pale glows over tired linoleum floors, and a few figures loitered nearby. Legal assistants, court reporters, a bailiff on his lunch break. But Asha didn't see any of them. Her focus narrowed to the double doors at the building's front, beyond which waited the gauntlet of reporters, camera crews, and photographers who had swarmed the case from day one. As they neared the entrance, Jacqueline adjusted her cuff and gave Asha a sideways glance. "Once we step outside, it's noise. They'll push for quotes. They'll bait you. You don't owe them anything." "I know," Asha replied. "But I'm not hiding." Jacqueline gave a faint smirk. "Didn't think you would." They reached the final set of doors. Through the frosted glass, the shadows of people shifted and flickered. Voices already leaked in, reporters warming up their scripts, photographers jostling for position, security trying to manage the line. The chaos pulsed just on the other side. Asha took a single breath, not for nerves, for intention. She had walked into that courtroom stripped of everything people thought she should be: agreeable, silent, fragile, disposable. She had spoken the truth without apology, and now she would walk out of it on her terms. When the doors opened, the world outside exploded in flashes. "Miss Monroe, can you confirm the amount of the settlement? Is Jared Locke facing criminal charges? Do you feel this was justice? Will you be returning to the industry after this? Miss Monroe, what would you say to young models watching this case unfold? Was this about revenge or reform?" She didn't answer. She walked. Her white suit shimmered faintly in the sun, untouched by the heat, immaculate in design, deliberate in choice. No tears, no statements, just presence. And the world watched. By the time she stepped into the back seat of the black car waiting for her, the settlement rumors had already begun circulating. High six figures, possibly more. Sources close to the matter speculated across social media and industry gossip channels, but Asha didn't bother reading the headlines. She didn't need to. The payout was never the prize. It was the lever she had been waiting for. Less than 2 weeks later, she filed the business registration paperwork. Monroe Models. She did it quietly, with no fanfare or marketing blitz. No press release, just ink on contracts, bank transfers, and a single mission guiding every decision. Build the agency she never had. The money was enough to start strong. She leased a wide, sunlit space on the 5th floor of an old industrial building in Manhattan's Garment District, a neighborhood layered with fashion history, but still close enough to the subway lines and street vendors to keep it grounded. The office had hardwood floors and exposed beams, tall windows that let in morning light and framed the skyline like an art piece. Asha filled it with energy, not extravagance. Vibrant art from Black and Indigenous painters, shelves of books by women who had rewritten their own narratives, and long work tables where creativity could breathe. Everything about the agency was intentional. The models she recruited weren't chosen by quotas or filtered by client stereotypes. They came from places other agencies had written off, runways they'd been pushed off of, editorials they'd been passed over for, rooms they were never let into. Women who had once been called too dark, too ethnic, too outspoken, too masculine, too political. Women who had been told they were bad for business because they refused to be silent. They walked into Monroe Models and were told, "You're not difficult. You're uncompromising." That's a strength. Asha set the tone early. Every contract included a strict, non-negotiable harassment policy. Clients, photographers, stylists, anyone working with Monroe talent had to sign behavioral clauses. Violations were met with immediate blacklisting. There were no gray areas, no vague definitions, no chances to charm or bribe their way around it. Trust wasn't extended through lip service. It was earned through conduct. And she didn't build it alone. Her first official hire was Keisha Duma. They met in the new office for the first time since the trial ended. The same woman who had once offered quiet makeup room solidarity now stood in the center of the creative floor, holding a coffee in one hand and a tablet in the other, already pitching mood boards for campaigns that hadn't even been booked yet. "You didn't say this place had light," Keisha said, eyes scanning the ceiling beams. "Feels like it's been waiting for us." Asha smiled, something soft and full-blooming behind her usual control. "Then let's make it louder." As head of creative, Keisha got to work fast. She cast shoots that centered bodies often cropped out of high fashion. She booked photographers from underrepresented communities, insisted on collaborative visioning sessions where models could speak freely about the stories they wanted to tell. She refused to flatten beauty into sameness. Within weeks, the agency produced its first test shoot, titled Body of Truth. It featured models with vitiligo, with scars, with shaved heads and stretch marks and full hips and fierce eyes. It was not a plea for diversity. It was a declaration of reality. The images went viral, not just because they were bold, but because they carried a rare integrity. There was no manipulation, no glossy erasure. The industry took notice. Editorials followed. Small brands reached out. Stylists and designers, many of whom had seen Asha in boardrooms or behind the camera in her quieter years, now watched her ascend with a force they hadn't anticipated. They had underestimated her before. Now they simply adjusted. The office began to buzz, not just with bookings, but with life. New faces arrived daily. Some came with baggage, the sting of rejection still fresh, the fatigue of years spent shrinking themselves for the sake of work. Others carried defiance, energy sharpened by years of being overlooked. Asha welcomed them all the same. She knew their stories before they spoke. She saw the weight in their shoulders, the guarded hope in their smiles. A model named Jamila, 24 and recently dropped from a major agency for being too confrontational, approached Asha one afternoon after a casting. "They said I was a liability," she said. "Because I told a stylist not to touch my hair." Asha didn't blink. "Here, that's policy, not confrontation." Jamila blinked back tears and laughed. "I almost quit." "Good," Asha said. "Almost means you didn't." Word spread faster than Asha expected. Not through traditional PR, but through people. Word of mouth. Whisper networks. Formerly blacklisted models emailed her directly. Some sent long messages. Others sent a single line. "You give me hope." The agency's inbox overflowed. Monroe Models was not just a business, it was becoming a movement. And yet, Asha remained grounded. She arrived early most mornings, before the models. She walked the space, reviewed bookings, met with Keisha to talk strategy. She joined model orientation meetings. She reviewed each new face's portfolio herself. Nothing passed through without intention. Her phone, once filled with cautious outreach from publicists and lawyers, now buzzed with texts from stylists and creatives asking, "Can we build something with you?" She didn't say yes to everyone. She didn't have to. The agency wasn't built on fear of scarcity. It was built on the understanding that abundance grows where safety and truth are allowed to breathe. And somewhere beneath the headlines, the applause, the quiet envy from those who never thought she'd rise again, Asha continued forward. Not for revenge, not for approval, but because she had created something no one else could take from her. Because she had made space where others had only offered silence. Because the runway now began wherever she chose to walk. The collapse of Apex Models was not immediate. It didn't erupt in a single public implosion or a fiery scandal too big to contain. No, The downfall came in quiet, steady waves, subtle at first, then unmistakable, like rot in the foundation of a once polished facade. It began with rumors, slipped into conversations at industry parties, and whispered over wine at gallery openings. People stopped using the word powerhouse when describing Apex. Then they stopped saying the name at all. It started with the models. Some of the agency's most recognizable faces, those with lucrative fragrance deals, glossy magazine covers, and front-row invitations to international fashion weeks, began to disappear from Apex's roster. At first, their departures were spun as amicable transitions or a desire to explore new opportunities. But insiders knew better. They were leaving because they didn't feel protected, because staying meant being complicit in silence that had grown far too loud. What Asha had exposed wasn't just the misconduct of 3 men and 1 executive. She had revealed the culture, calcified and complicit, that had made the abuse possible. And once that truth was laid bare, no amount of crisis management could make people unsee it. Then the clients began pulling back. Luxury brands canceled pre-scheduled campaigns without explanation. Fashion houses, who had once relied on Apex for diverse casting, began courting smaller, more transparent agencies. High-profile sponsors rescinded support for agency-affiliated events. Designers dropped partnerships. And when questioned publicly, they offered polite but clear responses. We are reassessing our professional alignments in light of recent revelations. Within 4 months of the settlement's conclusion, Apex's quarterly revenue dropped by nearly 30%. Their social channels slowed to a crawl. Engagement fell off. Influential fashion publications declined to feature Apex-repped models unless under direct client request. The agency's once coveted Fashion Week slot, a cornerstone of its seasonal dominance, was quietly cut by the organizing committee, citing changes in partner selection criteria. It wasn't personal, they said. It was policy. But everyone understood the subtext. Lauren Harper, the once slick talent manager who had dismissed Asha's warnings with performative concern and polished avoidance, vanished from the public-facing arm of the agency within weeks of the settlement's sealing. His name was removed from the official staff page. No statement was made, no promotion announced. Insiders said he had taken a leave of absence, but most believed he had simply walked away before he could be pushed. Those close to him described a man whose ambition had turned in on itself. He had become, as one former co-worker put it, radioactive. Other agencies wouldn't return his calls. No one wanted to align themselves with the man whose greatest contribution had been the artful mismanagement of a scandal that should have been stopped before it ever escalated. As for Jared Locke, the former executive who had once hovered over Apex like a kingmaker, his fall was sharper and darker. Following his firing, Jared attempted to rebrand. He launched a personal website filled with vague language about reputation strategy and brand resilience. He positioned himself as a consultant for public figures navigating high-pressure optics. The irony was obvious to everyone but him. His firm, Locke Strategies, existed online but attracted no real clients. No press features, no sponsorships, not a single public endorsement. The fashion world, even in its hypocrisy, had learned enough to know that aligning with a man whose emails read like warnings against justice was too dangerous, even for those who had once dined at his table. He made a few appearances at lower-tier PR events, smaller panels, niche industry mixers. People greeted him with polite nods, but few lingered. His offers to collaborate were met with vague promises to circle back. And within months, his name stopped appearing in event invites altogether. He became a relic of the very machine he once helped build. And then there were Bryce, Chase, and Drew. Their names never made it to primetime headlines in the way Asha's had. They weren't photographed leaving courtrooms or profiled in exposés, but they didn't disappear. Their reputations dissolved slowly, dragged under by a flood of footage, testimony, and public outrage that never truly left the internet. They lost jobs. Not just in fashion, many had never held official titles, but in the adjacent fields their wealth and family names had once protected. Invitations stopped arriving. Women crossed streets to avoid them. College classmates and professional peers unfollowed them quietly. Statements unspoken but clear. One of them, Drew, was charged formally, the only one caught with both physical evidence and eyewitness confirmation. His case lingered in legal limbo, delayed by filings and continuances. But the outcome mattered less than the process. His name now lived in court records, and everyone who had ever hired him or entertained him knew it. Chase, for a while, attempted to turn the scandal into a kind of counter-narrative. He gave an interview to an underground podcast, trying to cast himself as a misunderstood man punished by wokeness. The episode was pulled within 48 hours after backlash threatened to ruin the show's platform. He hasn't spoken publicly since. Bryce, the one who had once sneered at Asha on set with entitled confidence, was said to have returned to his father's business in Connecticut, far from the glittering lights of Manhattan. His name never again appeared in casting spaces or PR guest lists. And though none of them served time, at least not yet, they were marked in other ways. They were the punchline to quiet jokes at dinners. They were the anecdote told by models to warn each other. They were the shadows of a system exposed. Apex, though still technically operational, existed as a husk of what it once was. It had been stripped of prestige, star talent, and the illusion of invincibility. The very institution that once silenced Asha to maintain its grip on relevance now struggled to get a callback from mid-tier clients. Their fall was not a spectacle. It was a slow drowning. And Asha? She didn't gloat. She never commented publicly on their downfall, never posted quotes or interviews mocking their collapse. She didn't need to. Her work, her presence, and the thriving agency she had built spoke louder than any headline. While the old empire cracked and crumbled beneath the weight of its own arrogance, she continued building, brick by brick, model by model, page by page, and she didn't look back. The dojo hadn't changed. The mats still bore the faint scent of sweat and time, and the polished floor creaked in familiar ways when her bare feet pressed into it. The walls, lined with photographs and faded banners, held memories in their quiet corners, memories of stumbles and triumphs, of bruises that healed and lessons that lingered. Asha stood at the center again, the place where she had learned stillness and strike, control and release. No cameras followed her here. No reporters, no flashing lights, no high fashion. Here, she was not Asha Monroe the model, or the woman behind Monroe Models, or the face of an industry reckoning. Here, she was just the girl who had once stood trembling in the same spot, fists clenched and heart thudding, trying to find balance in a world that constantly tried to knock her off center. Her movements came slowly at first, old forms returning through muscle memory, each stance settling back into her body like a second language rediscovered. A jab, sharp and clean. A front kick, held for precision. A low sweep, followed by a smooth recovery. No performance, no choreography. Just the rhythm of discipline folding into breath. In the mirror-lined wall across from her, she caught a flicker of motion. 3 young girls stood near the edge of the mat, their shoes off, watching silently. One clutched a water bottle to her chest, the others hovering with that hesitant curiosity children have when they're unsure whether they're allowed to ask something big. Asha paused, turned toward them with an open, steady expression. "You want to try?" she asked, not demanding, just offering. They exchanged glances. Then, as if unspoken agreement passed between them, they stepped forward together. The smallest, no older than 8, looked up and said, "You're the lady from the video, the one who fought those men." Asha nodded once. "That's me." "Were you scared?" the girl asked. "Yeah," Asha said, kneeling so they were eye to eye. "I was, but I knew I wasn't going to freeze. That's what training's for, not to make you fearless, just to make you ready." The girls nodded, slowly, as if committing the idea to memory. She guided them through the basics: stances, balance, breathing. She didn't speak much, didn't over-explain. She let them feel the strength in their own limbs, let them laugh when their timing was off, and cheer when they nailed a move on the first try. She corrected gently, celebrated generously. For the first time in a long while, Asha felt her body moving not to protect or perform, but to give. After the session, one of the girls lingered behind as the others collected their things. "My mom said you made the world pay attention," she said. "She said you didn't wait for someone to save you." Asha smiled. "No one should have to wait. You protect yourself, and you protect each other. That's how you change things." Later that week, Asha returned to the neighborhood where she'd grown up, where stoops leaned forward into narrow streets, and every face seemed to carry stories, passed down through silence and nods. The sidewalks here weren't lined with luxury. They were lined with resilience. She didn't come with press or handlers, just a small canvas tote, a box of pastries, and a mind full of names and addresses she hadn't forgotten. She made her first stop at the corner bodega that had always let her run a tab when she was a teenager, and left a donation envelope with the shopkeeper's granddaughter, now running the place with sharp eyes and sharper wit. Then she climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor of the building where the police had arrived that night, where a woman had shouted from her window and refused to let the world pretend it hadn't seen what it saw. The woman's name was Mrs. Ellison, a retired schoolteacher who had taught history in a nearby public school for over 3 decades. Her living room smelled of jasmine tea and old books. Her couch sagged slightly in the middle, and her window still framed the very sidewalk where it had all unfolded. They sat across from each other with steaming mugs between them, the air filled with that quiet comfort shared between women who understand that gratitude doesn't need to be dramatic to be sincere. "I was halfway through a documentary," Mrs. Ellison said, stirring honey into her tea. "Heard the shouting. Looked out and saw those boys surrounding you. Saw how calm you were, how you didn't run. I was ready," Asha said softly. "You were more than ready. You were right. And that matters more than people think." They sipped in silence for a few moments, watching the light shift through the dusty blinds. "People think bravery is loud," Mrs. Ellison continued, "but it's quiet. It's that moment where you decide to do something when no one else will. I was proud of you before the papers, before the hashtags. You were already enough." Asha blinked, the words settling deep, not as praise, but as permission. For years she had fought to prove, to defend, to justify. But here, in the small warmth of a familiar room, she allowed herself, for just a moment, to feel seen without effort. Before she left, Mrs. Ellison placed a small handwritten note into her hand. It read, "Keep your power, but share your peace. That's how we multiply both." Back outside, Asha stood at the edge of the block and looked around. The same streets that had once felt too narrow now stretched wide with possibility. Her agency was growing. The industry was changing. But here, among the people who had witnessed her when the world still doubted, she remembered why she had fought in the first place. 1 year. It passed not like a clean breath of time, but like a lived one, marked by slow building progress, hard-won victories, and the constant work of shaping something solid out of the fractured pieces that the industry and the world had left behind. A year after the night, Asha Monroe stood bloodied, but unbroken beneath the streetlights of her block. Monroe Models was no longer just a promising agency. It had become a rising force, sought after not for trendiness, but for conviction. Its name appeared in campaign credits, creative summits, casting calls across the globe. Top-tier clients now sought Monroe talent, not because they wanted to look inclusive, but because they were finally realizing that strength, range, and truth were more captivating than polish alone. And yet, despite the acclaim, despite the magazine spreads and closed-door offers from investors eager to stamp their logos onto her movement, Asha remained direct, unsentimental. She knew the industry's cycles, how quickly it chewed up newness and spat it out once the headlines faded. So instead of chasing momentum, she built foundation, which made the panel her agency hosted on the anniversary of the attack not just a commemoration, but a declaration. Safety and power in the industry was printed across the backdrop in bold sans-serif letters. The panel was held in a clean, sunlit loft space in Brooklyn, filled with folding chairs that didn't stay empty for long. Models, creatives, journalists, and quiet whistleblowers all gathered, not for optics, but for truth. Asha sat at the center, wearing a black fitted blazer over a cotton tank, her posture relaxed but unshakable. Keisha flanked her left, and to her right, 3 younger models shared their stories with clarity that made the room still. "We were told to be grateful," one said. "Grateful we were even there." Another nodded. They counted on us being too afraid to speak up. Or too exhausted. Asha waited before she spoke, letting silence stretch just enough to make space for those words to land. "No one should have to trade silence for success," she said, her voice even. "And no one should mistake survival for complicity. The industry thrives on unspoken rules, but we're here to rewrite them." Out loud, applause followed, not polite, not tepid. It was thunderous and full, the sound of a room exhaling decades of held breath. In the week that followed, the ripple turned into a wave. New lawsuits surfaced against Apex models, this time from models who had remained silent for years, too afraid, too unsupported. Emboldened by what Asha had built and the conversations she'd made public, they came forward. Their testimonies exposed the depth of the agency's rot: manipulated contracts, coerced silence, dangerous environments dressed up as glamour. Within days, Apex Models officially shuttered its doors. Its offices were vacated, its site taken down. No farewell statement, no final spin. Just a vacuum where power used to pretend to live. The industry moved on without mourning. The world, meanwhile, had a new image to focus on. The cover of Visionary magazine hit stands in late spring, matte and unfiltered. There was no gold gown, no avant-garde makeup, no wind machines. Just Asha, seated on a black mat in an empty studio. She wore crisp G pants, her Monroe Models tee loose and tucked, and her black belt tied firmly around her waist. The lighting was neutral, honest, strong. She looked straight into the camera, not with defiance, not with invitation, but with absolute ownership. The headline read, "Strike Back. Asha Monroe redefines power." Inside the issue, the feature didn't focus on revenge or scandal. It focused on structure, how Asha had built a place where others could not just survive, but lead. How safety, in her world, was not a burden or a checkbox. It was a standard. But the cover wasn't the image that stuck. The one that lived in memory came later, in a montage that swept through social feeds and into classrooms, workshops, and quiet corners where girls had learned to doubt themselves. Young girls, some wide-eyed, some already wary, standing in line at Monroe Models' open calls. Keisha snapping Polaroids, grinning. Asha in a wide studio room, walking alongside a row of new faces, correcting posture, adjusting stance, her voice calm and patient. Then again, in the dojo, this time surrounded by the same models, now barefoot on the mat, laughing as they practiced joint locks and balance drills. No heels, no mirrors, just strength. It was mentorship not as charity, but as legacy. She didn't teach them to fight so they could strike first. She taught them so they wouldn't flinch. So they would know how to step forward, steady and whole, when the world expected them to shrink. Her voiceover played as the footage shifted to slow, thoughtful cuts. We walk the runway like it's war, and we don't walk alone. Those words were spoken not as a threat, but as a promise. And finally, as the day faded and the office lights clicked off one by one, Asha stepped through the front door of Monroe Models, keys in hand. She paused on the threshold, the city behind her aglow with streetlights and sirens in the distance. Not danger this time, just the rhythm of a place still spinning. She turned, locked the door, and stood there a moment longer. Not to reflect, not to revel, just to breathe. She had built what they said couldn't exist. And now, it would outlive her. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.